Some legal predictions are easier to make than others, and this one wasn't all that hard to make. Jussie Smollett's counterclaim for malicious prosecution was dismissed. Viva Fry, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber. We are entering week 7 or 8 of the global lockdown. I am vlogging from my home office, my Subaru. And a change of pace, if you can believe it, today's vlog is going to have nothing to do with the My Sharona Cyrus. Jussie Smollett, the legal saga that just keeps going on and on and on like the Energizer Bunny. Who remembers that ad? How old am I? I'm old.
I'm getting old.
Jussie Smollett is back in the news with a federal judge granting a motion to dismiss of Jussie Smollett's counterclaim for malicious prosecution. Now, I don't think I'm going out on a limb anymore by taking for granted that everybody pretty much knows what's going on with the Jussie Smollett situation in general. That being said, there are some legal procedural things going on that people might be less familiar with. I have been vlogging the Jussie Smollett legal saga from the very beginning. I have now compiled an exhaustive playlist of videos on all of the legal questions that have come up in the context of this file. I'm going to link that playlist right here, so if you don't know exactly what's going on, go give some of those a watch before watching this video. But the absolute long and short 30,000 foot overview in a nutshell summary of what's going on is as follows. Jussie Smollett claimed to be the victim of a homophobic and racist hate crime, which allegedly turned out to be a hoax that he orchestrated against himself. He allegedly paid two brothers, the Osundairo brothers, $3,000 to carry out the fake attack on himself. He filed a police report with the Chicago Police Department. The Chicago Police Department quickly became suspicious of the alleged attack. After a 2-week investigation, it became relatively clear to the Chicago Police Department that it was in fact a hoax, and Jussie Smollett filed a false police report. Jussie Smollett was subsequently indicted on a number of charges, including filing a false police report. Those charges against him were subsequently dropped in circumstances that can only be described as suspect to say the least. The city of Chicago then filed civil proceedings under the Cost Recovery Ordinance, the CRO, and the False Statement Ordinance, the FSO, in order to recover the cost of the investigation into this alleged hoax. Not only that, but the Osundairo brothers, for their part, sued Jussie Smollett's attorneys for defamation for statements Jussie Smollett's attorneys made in press conferences after the alleged attack. There were a bunch of other side proceedings that went on in the interim. Jussie Smollett filed a motion for transfer of jurisdiction to the federal court, but more important than that, at least for the purposes of this vlog, in the context of the lawsuit of the Chicago Police Department against Jussie Smollett counterclaimed against the city and a bunch of other people for malicious prosecution. And this on the basis that because the charges were ultimately dropped in exchange for Jussie Smollett's forfeiture of his $10,000 bond and 2 days community service, that he could therefore sue for malicious prosecution because he was never actually convicted of the crime? That's the logic. I've done videos on all of these issues, including Jussie Smollett's counterclaim for malicious prosecution, which I'm going to link right there because it contained a prediction which seems to have turned out to be relatively accurate. Having read through and analyzed Jussie Smollett's counterclaim for malicious prosecution, it was relatively clear even to this ignorant Quebec attorney that it stood virtually no chance of success, so much so that it did not even survive a motion to dismiss. And that is what brings us to today's vlog. We are going to go through the judgment granting the motion to dismiss of Jussie Smollett's counterclaim for malicious prosecution beginning now. Memorandum, opinion, and order. Now, we've already done a brief summary of the facts, so we'll just skip right through this. The city of Chicago filed this lawsuit against Jussie Smollett seeking to recover costs incurred in connection with the Chicago Police Department's investigation of Smollett for allegedly filing a false police report stemming from a January 2019 attack. Smollett filed a counterclaim against the city of Chicago, CPD Detective Michael Tears, CPD Detective Commander Edward Woodnicki, CPD Superintendent Eddie Johnson, and John and Jane Doe defendants 1 through 10, Abimbola Osundairo and Olabinjo Osundairo. Smollett alleges state law claims for malicious prosecution against all defendants and a malicious prosecution claim under 42 U.S.C. 1983 claim against the city defendants. Defendants moved to dismiss Smollett's counterclaims for failing to state a claim under Rule 12.6b. For the reasons discussed below, the defendants' motions to dismiss are granted. Now, we have discussed motions to dismiss extensively in previous vlogs, most notably the Covington Catholic Kids saga. We're going to go over it again in this judgment, but just to refresh your memory, a motion to dismiss under a Rule 12b6 is a motion to dismiss on the basis that the party failed to state a claim, even assuming the allegations in their motion are true. You will recall that in the Covington Catholic Nicholas Salmon defamation lawsuit, a motion to dismiss on a Rule 12b6 was filed on the basis that even if Nicholas Salmon's allegations were true, it was not defamation because the statements were not of and about Nicholas Salmon, or the statements were matters of opinion and therefore could not be defamatory. So therefore, even assuming the allegations were true, the plaintiff had failed to state a claim in law. And that is the very same motion to dismiss that we are facing right now, in that even if the allegations in Jussie Smollett's counterclaim for malicious prosecution are true, he has failed to state a claim in law. On a a motion to dismiss under Rule 12b-6, the court accepts the complaint's well-pleaded factual allegations with all reasonable inferences drawn in the non-moving party's favor, but not its legal conclusions. The facts below are drawn from Smollett's amended counter-complaint and are accepted as true for the purposes of reviewing this motion. That's the standard, and we spend the next 5 or 6 pages going over the facts, which we're only going to do summarily because we've already done them relatively thoroughly. According to the amended counter-complaint, on or about January 22nd, 2019, Smollett received an envelope delivered to the Fox Productions studio in Chicago which contained a racist and homophobic death threat and a white powdery substance. Incidentally, just to open up a parenthesis, there was in fact an FBI investigation into that incident which we haven't had any news about in a while.
Closing the parentheses.
At 2 a.m. on January 29, 2019, Smollett was physically attacked, and we all know the circumstances of the attack. CPD treated Smollett as the victim of a crime initially. However, over the course of the investigation, CPD began to anonymously share false and misleading information about the investigation to the media. Now, bear in mind, this is not the judge's opinion. These are not statements of fact. These are the allegations in Jussie Smollett's counterclaim for malicious prosecution, which the judge has to take for granted in the context of a motion to dismiss under Rule 12b-6. On February 14, 2019, the CPD arrested Abel and Ola Osundairo for perpetrating the attack on Smollett. At the end of the paragraph, the Osundairo brothers' attorney consulted with their clients, and at or near the time the CPD was required to charge or release them, the Osundairo brothers then told the police that they had been involved in the attack and that it was orchestrated by Smollett. Smollett alleges that the CPD, including Detective Commander Wodnicki, Detective Tease, and John and Jane Doe defendants, took unorthodox steps in violation of protocol to obtain statements from the Osundairo brothers and close the investigation. Smollett denies knowledge of the Osundairo brothers' involvement in his January 29, 2019 attack. Smollett alleges that the Osundairo brothers decided with their attorney to advance the hoax narrative to avoid criminal charges, in part because it was already a media narrative. On February 21, 2019, Superintendent Eddie Johnson held a press conference to address the arrest of Smollett, stating that the attack was a, quote, publicity stunt and a, quote, phony attack for which Smollett paid $3,500 to stage because he was dissatisfied with his salary. Superintendent Johnson repeated these allegations in interviews on February 25, 2019. Smollett alleges that the CPD, including Detective Wodnicki, Detective Tease, Superintendent Johnson, and John and Jane Doe defendants, knew or should have known that the Osundairo brothers' statements were unreliable. Smollett alleges that the CPD ignored evidence that supports his case. He claims that the CPD ignored text messages from the Osundairo brothers demonstrating, quote, a strong homophobic sentiment, and evidence and statements from 2 independent witnesses indicating that a young white male was involved in the attack. Smollett also claims evidence was ignored that showed the Osundairo brothers' statements were unreliable, namely that the Osundairo brothers told CPD officers that Smollett told them not to bring their cell phones to the attack, but statements from an Uber driver and yellow cab driver that served as transportation indicated that they did have their cell phones. Those are the factual allegations that the court has to accept as true in the context of a motion to dismiss under a Rule 12b-6. These allegations have to be accepted as true and construed in the most favorable light in favor of the party whose proceedings are the object of the motion to dismiss. But a critical caveat, while the court has to accept as true the allegations and construe them in the most favorable light, they do not have to accept as true legal conclusions. And what exactly might that look like? Well, let's just take a hyper-oversimplified example. In the proceedings, Mr. Orange says that Mr. Pink took a bike out of the backyard of Mr. Orange. Also, in those proceedings, Mr. Orange acknowledges that the bike in fact belonged to Mr. Pink. Nonetheless, in those very same proceedings, Mr. Orange alleges that Mr. Pink, in having taken the bike out of the backyard of Mr. Orange, stole from Mr. Orange. The allegation of theft is itself a legal conclusion, so while the court has to take for granted and construe in the most favorable light that Mr. Pink in fact took a bike out of Mr. Orange's backyard, they do not have to accept as fact that Mr. Pink stole from Mr. Orange. Moreover, to the extent that Mr. Orange acknowledges in the proceedings that the bike belonged to Mr. Pink in the first place, there you would have the perfect example of granting a motion to dismiss, even assuming the allegations are true. And this notwithstanding an allegation that Mr. Pink stole from Mr. Orange, which is itself a legal conclusion that the court does not have to take for granted. All right, long-winded analogy, and I hope that sort of helps everyone understand the situation. And what does the court have to say about Jussie Smollett's counterclaim for malicious prosecution? Let's just read the judgment, shall we? Smollett alleges a state law malicious prosecution claim against the city defendants for their conduct in obtaining the, quote, false and unreliable statements from the Osundairo brothers, using those statements as the basis for the criminal complaint against Smollett and ignoring contradictory evidence. In order to bring a malicious prosecution case under Illinois law, Smollett must show 1. The commencement or continuance by the defendant of an original judicial proceeding against him. 2. The termination of the proceeding in his favor. 3. The absence of probable cause for the proceeding. 4, malice, and 5, damages. The absence of any one of these elements bars Smollett from pursuing the claim. 5 conditions that are cumulative and not alternative, meaning that it is not if any one of those conditions are met that the party can have a claim for malicious prosecution. It has to be all 5 of them that are met. And you don't need to be a rocket scientist or even a lawyer for that matter to anticipate which one of these conditions is going to prove problematic for Jussie Smollett. Smollett argues that his case has been terminated because a nolle prosequi was entered in his favor. The city argues the nolle prosequi in his case is distinct since it gave leave to the special prosecutor to reinstate charges. In most cases, a nolle prosequi is not a final disposition of a case, but is a procedure which restores the matter to the same state which existed before the government initiated the prosecution. Now, it seems I may be mispronouncing the term, but let's just check with that YouTube pronunciation site.
Nolle prosequi.
Okay, I'm actually close enough. In this case, according to the defendants, the city entered the nolle prosequi in his case only after Smollett agreed to both the forfeiture of his fine and to serve community service. In short, they assert that the instant matter was terminated with a requirement in return that he perform those 2 conditions. Involuntary dismissal is not indicative of the innocence of the accused when it is the result of an agreement or compromise with the accused. Here the court is saying that it's not simply the case that the prosecutors declined to prosecute Jussie Smollett for the charges that were brought against him. The court is saying that the nolle prosequi, or the declining to prosecute, was entered into a sort of a conditional agreement with Jussie Smollett in that he forfeited his $10,000 bond and agreed to 2 days community service. But because the court has to take for granted the allegations in Jussie Smollett's counterclaim, and because Jussie Smollett conveniently does not allege the conditions on which the nolle prosequi was granted, the court writes as follows. Of course, the court could merely ask the counterplaintiff to file an affidavit pursuant to his Rule 11 obligations to provide the court with the agreement entered into when his charges were dropped. Yet the court need not do so, since there is another reason that Smollett cannot allege that the charges were resolved in his favor, and that is the existence of the special prosecutor. The case that was once dismissed has returned in the form of a special prosecutor who had the ability to investigate and press criminal charges against him. It could hardly be said that the case is over since the special prosecutor has charged him again. Now he faces the same allegations brought in February 2020 by the special prosecutor when another grand jury brought an indictment after hearing the results of a 6-month investigation. Smollett is correct that at this stage, the court must take his well-pled allegations as true. However, this does not mean that the court must ignore public documents that are available to the court, such as the indictment from the special prosecutor. Long story short, the court is arguing that it is wholly implausible to argue that the case was resolved in Jussie Smollett's favor when a special prosecutor had been appointed to the same case. More interesting than that, because we would assume that Jussie Smollett is not going to make allegations of the new special prosecutor that is investigating the case, because that doesn't really work in favor of Jussie Smollett. This part of the judgment highlights what is known as judicial knowledge. While it is true that the court has to take for granted the allegations in Jussie Smollett's pleadings, the court can also take into consideration things that are known by judicial knowledge. Things that the court can know on its own despite the fact that they are not alleged in the pleadings. Judicial knowledge can include common facts like the population of a country, it can include jurisprudence, and it can also include court documents in other files. And in this judgment, the court is saying even if we accept as true the allegations in Jussie Smollett's motion and construe them in the most favorable light possible, we are not ignoring the fact that we know there is an indictment against Jussie Smollett for the very same acts. He is currently facing charges for those acts. It is impossible and implausible for him to say that the situation was resolved in his favor to the point where he can now file a claim for malicious prosecution. Even assuming that Smollett could establish that there was a final disposition in his favor, he must next be able to allege that defendants did not have probable cause to arrest him. Probable cause is merely the, quote, probability or substantial chance that criminal activity exists, but, quote, does not require the existence of criminal activity to be more likely true than not true. Here, probable cause was met by the Osundawa brothers' statements to the police and the corroborating evidence of those statements, including videotaped evidence. While Smollett alleges these statements were unreliable and self-serving, he ignores that there was additional evidence to corroborate the Osundawa brothers' statements, including suspicious texts between the parties and the deposit of a large check to Abel shortly before the attack. Smollett apparently also alleged malicious prosecution for violation of his rights under Section 1983 of the United States Code, which is for deprivation of rights. To which the court responds as follows. In his pleadings, Smollett does not indicate under which amendment of the Constitution he brings his claim. However, there is no cause of action for malicious prosecution based on the Fourth Amendment. Recognizing this, Smollett attempts to justify his pleadings, stating that, quote, despite the malicious prosecution heading, the factual allegations plausibly state a claim under Section 1983 for the city defendant's violation of Mr. Smollett's Fourth Amendment rights. Smollett then claims that the city violated his Fourth Amendment rights by holding him in custody without probable cause. The court then proceeds to deliver what we lawyers call a judicial smackdown. One does not want to be the attorneys on the receiving end of this kind of drafting. Smollett cannot now attempt to state that he was bringing a Section 1983 claim for unlawful detention when his countercomplaint makes no such reference. Having been caught attempting to bring a claim that does not exist, Smollett attempts to retrofit the pleadings and claim that, despite changing the underpinnings of his 1983 claim, sufficient notice of an unlawful detention claim has been provided to the city defendants so as not to violate Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 8. There is not sufficient notice to apprise the city defendants that Smollett would be bringing an unlawful detention claim rather than a malicious prosecution claim. Smollett urges that we allow his reply to the city's motion to dismiss serve as a supplement to his pleadings. However, there is no support for allowing a litigant to completely amend his complaint with a new count that is not pled in the original. In fact, this court and other courts in this circuit have dismissed complaints where parties have attempted to improperly bring malicious prosecution claims under Section 1983. The court is saying that in law there is no cause of action for malicious prosecution based on Fourth Amendment rights. And the court is saying despite your best efforts, Jussie Smollett and your attorneys, you cannot now transform your malicious prosecution claim into a claim for unlawful detention. They not only say that, they basically say shame on you for even trying in legal talk. For the foregoing reasons, the city defendants and Osundaira Brothers' motions to dismiss are granted with prejudice as to count 1, as proceedings are currently ongoing in state court and he cannot bring a state malicious claim until proceedings have been terminated. We've talked about this before, but dismissal with prejudice means that the party cannot amend their pleadings to correct whatever deficiencies there were in those pleadings. Criminal proceedings are currently ongoing against Jussie Smollett, so he cannot file a claim for malicious prosecution until those proceedings have been resolved in his favor. Count 2 is dismissed without prejudice. If Smollett wishes to file an amended countercomplaint consistent with this order, he must do so within 21 days of the entry of this order. Dismissed without prejudice, meaning that if Jussie Smollett wants to go and amend his counterclaim so as to make a claim for unlawful detention, he has to go do so in accordance with the terms set out in this judgment, that being 21 days from the issuance of this court order. And who wants to make a prediction as to whether or not Jussie Smollett is in fact going to go amend his counterclaim to include a claim for unlawful detention? I am predicting he is actually going to do it. There, I said it, time will tell, 21 days to do so, so we're going to see what's going to happen, and I will be there following it if and when something does happen. I hope you got something out of this video. If you like my videos and you like my content, please be sure to like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment in the comment section below. It feeds the algorithm. If you want to support the channel, all of the support links are in the pinned comment. But above all else, take care of yourselves, be safe, stay healthy, and now you know your vlog. Peace out. Booyah!